Hello, tubers. This is Pat Jordan coming to you from the Grain Ghettoshire in the hinterlands of Illinois. I'm doing a series of videos, slideshows really, called Hoaxxed, where I tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about vaccines. By accident during my researches, I fell across History and Pathology of Vaccination in 2 volumes by Edgar March Cruikshank. While I was taking care of my mother who was on dialysis, I spent the next 2 years of my life hand transcribing them so that they could be reprinted to show the world that the greatest fraud in history had already been exposed in 1889. I felt an immediate kinship for this excellent writer, clear thinker, and honest man who I affectionately call Dead Edgar. I will present here the preface of Dead Edgar's first volume so that you can understand how we got to this place of the insane vaccine fraud and how exposing it cost the career of a man who was one of the greatest minds of pre-1900s history. Yet, this work was relegated to anonymity by a system that operates by fraud and murder. A link is provided for my transcriptions of his books, either as Cruikshank's texts, suitable for home and academic study, and Cruikshank's text with my uncivilized, ungenteel commentary, lots and lots of bad words, that will show you a world that not even my buddy Edgar could have been aware of. Of course, I would suggest the one with my commentary. Telling the truth does not pay the bills, so please consider supporting the work that I started in 2008 to expose the hoax that is vaccines. In this preface, I have thought it necessary to lay before the profession the circumstances which have led to the production of these volumes. I had devoted myself for some time to pathological researches in connection with the communicable diseases of man and the lower animals when the discovery of an outbreak of cowpox in 1887 led me to investigate the history and pathology of this affection. At that time, I accepted and taught the doctrines in reference to this disease which are commonly held by the profession and are described in the textbooks of medicine. In endeavoring to discover the origin of this outbreak, it was proved beyond question that the cows had not been infected by milkers suffering from smallpox. This fact, together with the clinical characters of the disease in the cows and in the milkers infected from the cows, and the certainty that I had to deal, quote, not with an infectious disease like cattle plague or pleural pneumonia, which, by the way, folks, is mycoplasma, but with a disease which is communicated solely by contact, unquote, convinced me that the commonly accepted descriptions of the nature and origin of cowpox were purely theoretical. As the natural cowpox had not been investigated in this country for nearly half a century, it was obvious that a much neglected field of comparative pathology had been opened up for further inquiry. My interest in the subject was further stimulated by Sir James Paget, who very kindly examined one of the milkers casually infected from the cows, and while doing so, drew my attention to a copy of Dr. Creighton's work on cowpox and vaccinal syphilis, then just published. The question naturally arose whether my observations supported or refuted the conclusions arrived at by Dr. Creighton as the result of his historical researches. While attending at the National Vaccine Establishment of the local government board, I was unable to obtain any exact details, clinical or pathological, of the source of the lymph which was employed there. From my experience of this and other vaccination stations, I found that both official and unofficial vaccinators were completely occupied with the technique of vaccination to the exclusion of any precise knowledge of the history and pathology of the diseases from which their lymph stocks had been obtained. See the Corvelva reports out of Italy, folks. Thus, at this early stage in my investigation, I felt that what Seeley said in 1840 was still true. Quote, "The imperfect knowledge which we at present possess on many points connected with the natural history of the variola vaccina and the numerous and formidable impediments to the improvement and extension of that knowledge demand the continuance of vigilant, patient, and diligent inquiry." Unquote. In January 1888, while I was studying the literature of the subject at the library of the Royal College of Surgeons, Mr. Bailey, the librarian, to whom I am indebted for much courteous assistance, was engaged in recataloguing the library. He found a parcel of manuscripts which he thought might prove of interest to me. It contained letters from Hunter to Jenner and a manuscript which was thought to be the manuscript of Jenner's inquiry. On careful perusing it, I discovered that it differed in many respects from the published inquiry. It was, in fact, Jenner's communication to the Royal Society. I was so struck by the contents of this paper and the small amount of evidence upon which Jenner had first ventured to propose the substitution of cowpox inoculation or vaccination for the old system of smallpox inoculation or variolation, that I was induced to carefully look into the life of Jenner and the early history of vaccination as contained in Barron's biography and the correspondence and articles on the subject in contemporary medical and scientific periodicals. Now that the value of Jenner's manuscript and the interest attached thereto have been pointed out, it has been carefully preserved and entered into the catalog of the library and may be consulted by anyone desiring to do so. From a letter dated 1877, which will be found in the parcel, it will be seen that Hunter's letters and Jenner's manuscript were given to Sir James Paget by a lady into whose possession they had passed on the death and by the will of her cousin, the late Colonel Jenner, son of Dr. Jenner. On June 4th, 1879, Sir James Paget wrote to Mr., now Sir John Simon, president of the college, presenting the manuscripts to the library of the college. The manuscripts appeared to have been remained in a drawer until they were brought to light under the circumstances which I have just related. I gradually became so deeply impressed with the small amount of knowledge possessed by the practitioners concerning cowpox and other sources of vaccine lymph, and with the conflicting teachings and opinions of leading authorities in both the medical and veterinary professions, that I determined to investigate the subject for myself. From antiquarian booksellers in Paris, Berlin, and in this country, I succeeded in a very short time in obtaining a large number of works dealing with the early history of vaccination. They at the same time forwarded many work on smallpox inoculation, and thus my interest was aroused in this subject also, and its bearing upon the history and pathology of vaccination was soon apparent. In February 1888, I resolved to consult the leading authorities in France and to obtain, if possible, the history of both the Bordeaux lymph and of the outbreaks of cowpox which had been met with in that country during the time that the disease was supposed to be extinct in this. I take this opportunity of thanking Monsieur Hervieux for much information and for this kindness in affording me opportunities for observing the system of public vaccination in Paris. To Monsieur Cagny, I cannot sufficiently express my indebtedness for both introductions to his colleagues and for presenting me with a copy of the work of uh, Orzius Touraine, containing his classical essay on cowpox and horsepox. From Paris, I proceeded to Bordeaux. Dr. Layet and Monsieur Ballet received me with the greatest courtesy and afforded me every opportunity of obtaining information concerning the municipal vaccination service, and we discussed the details of the recent outbreak of cowpox which they had observed. I also succeeded in obtaining, through the kindness of Dr. Dubreuil, a full account of the spontaneous outbreak which was the source of a recent official stock of vaccine lymph which now employed in this country, although abandoned at the animal vaccine station at Bordeaux. At Toulouse, the veterinary school, I was able to obtain further information about the nature, clinical characters, and origin of cowpox and horsepox. Monsieur Pugh, the distinguished professor of veterinary pathology, furnished me with the details of his remarkable investigations into horsepox and has since granted me permission to reproduce the colored plates illustrating the subject. Monsieur Pugh's researches and observations will be of the greatest value in bringing to light a disease of the horse which is still unrecognized by practical veterinarians in this country. I also had the opportunity of studying the clinical characteristics and the results of inoculation of sheep pox. At Montpellier, I visited the vaccine establishment of Monsieur Poirquier and obtained from him some interesting information. On returning to Paris, I was most kindly received by Monsieur Chavot, who discussed with me the affinities of cowpox and showed me the beautiful and valuable drawings which had been prepared for the report of the Lyons Commission, but unfortunately had been withheld from publication owing to the expense that it would have entailed. On returning to England, I renewed investigations in Gloucestershire. Come on, man. Gloucestershire. Gloucester. How do they do that? I don't know. Wiltshire and Dorsetshire. I obtained additional information with reference to cases of cowpox in this country and fully realized that the belief that this disease is extinct in England has resulted from the determined and often successful attempts which were made by farmers, for obvious reasons, to conceal outbreaks when they occur. I also followed up the history of Mr. Jesty with visiting Worth Matravers in the Isle of Purbeck and obtaining all the local information possible. Lastly, for reference to some works, copies of which I have not hitherto succeeded in obtaining, I have availed myself of the British Museum and our medical libraries. The difficulty in gaining access to these works is no doubt the reason why originals have been so little read. It would hardly be possible for the practitioner, but with little time at his disposal, and if in the country, without access to many medical libraries, to undertake such an inquiry. But I trust that the system which has been followed in this work of giving copious extracts will induce others to study the original authorities. All the selections from Jenner's correspondence have been drawn from Barron's biography, with the exception of one letter which was obtained for me by Mr. W. K. Dale. I desire to thank him and also the owner for permission to reproduce it in facsimile. The essays composing the second volume have been reprinted with the object of affording references in handy form. My best thanks are due to Mr. James Seeley for approving the proposal to reprint his brother's classical papers, and to Mr. Badcock for granting me the permission to reprint his pamphlet. In conclusion, I desire to thank Messrs. W.K. Dale and E.F. Hiron for their assistance in passing the proof sheets through the press. Messrs. Vincent, Brooks, Day, and Son are to be congratulated upon the success with which they have reproduced the colored plates. Edgar, March Cruikshank, 24 Manchester Square, West, or W, April 1889.